Well, good afternoon and welcome along to Unbelievable here on Premier Christian Radio. It's Saturday afternoon. It's the time of the week on the radio station when Christians and non-Christians join me, Justin Briley, to discuss aspects of faith and belief. And what an interesting programme I've got lined up for you today. Do hold on to hear who my guests are today as we discuss a controversial topic. Now, just a reminder before we get into the show that you may not have it, but available right now for you and able to be posted out as we speak is Unbelievable, the Conference on DVD. It's the 2012 Apologetics Conference that I was hosting in London a little earlier on in the year, at the end of May. Great speakers on that DVD, 3 DVDs in fact. John Lennox, Michael Green, Krish Kandiah, Hugh Ross and Ken Samples of Reasons to Believe in the USA, Bonnie Yule-Kuhn, and other speakers and seminars and extra material. 10 hours, in fact, of material across 3 DVDs. So if you haven't already got hold of it, get your act together and get online. premier.org.uk/DVD is the place to order it from. Again, premier.org.uk/DVD. Look forward to hearing from you as well on the back of today's programme. Let me say right from the outset, if you want to get in touch about anything you hear on the programme today, do encourage you to email me, unbelievable@premier.org.uk, and I'll be giving out other ways to get in contact as we progress through today's show. As we ask the somewhat controversial question this afternoon, did Muhammad exist?
You're unbelievable.
And that's the question being asked by Robert Spencer of Jihad Watch. He's the author of the controversial new book of the same title, Did Muhammad Exist? Well, Robert is joining us on the line from the States. In conversation with him on today's show, Adnan Rashid, who is a Muslim researcher with the Hittin Institute, and he'll be able to tell us a bit more about what he does as well. But this is a book that has landed Robert in, serious trouble in some respects. He's had death threats and all kinds. We're going to be looking at the actual arguments he poses in the book, though, and seeing what Adnan has to say to it. Wonder what you think about it today as well. As I mentioned, we'll be giving you the chance for feedback too later on in the show. Well, welcome along to the programme, gentlemen both. Great to have you with me. Thank you, Adnan, for joining me here in the studio.
Thank you very much, Justin.
Great to have you. And Robert, thank you for joining me on the line from the States.
Thank you.
Good to have you with me, Robert. As you're new to this programme, it'd be good to get a little background to yourself. Just to fill us in on your background as a Christian, what sort of a background did you come from as far as faith goes?
Oh, as far as faith, my family is from what was the last great Islamic empire, the Ottoman Empire. They were Orthodox Christians there, and they were exiled at the end of World War I after declining the invitation to convert to Islam. And they came ultimately to the United States, to New York, and this is something that actually was the beginning of my own interest in and study of Islam itself.
Now, you run Jihad Watch. Just tell us about what that is and what it exists for.
Yes, Jihad Watch is a news and commentary site that is updated many times daily, designed to inform people about jihad activity, both violent and nonviolent, and Islamic supremacist activity to impose Islamic law, Sharia, on the rest of the world. We are a news site that gathers together the information about jihad activity and also offers commentary to help people understand what is happening behind the media bias that generally distorts the root causes of the events as they unfold daily.
You're a brave man, Robert, writing a book like this. It's pretty controversial material, isn't it?
Well, I didn't set out to do it as an act of bravery, but I did actually do it because I wanted to see if it could be done. Historical criticism of Judaism and Christianity have proceeded peacefully for several hundred years now, and there are people who find the findings of historical critics, particularly of Christianity, to be offensive or to be insulting or to be inimical to faith, but they generally don't kill those who carry out these kinds of investigations or threaten their lives. Islam has been generally immune from this kind of historical investigation precisely because of the violent threats that generally attend those who dare to undertake it. And there are some very courageous individuals, some courageous scholars, the Inara group in Europe and others in America, many of whom work under pseudonyms precisely because of the threat, who have carried out these investigations. But I wanted to see if we could have a civilized and peaceful discussion about these issues and investigate them on a historical basis, or if political correctness and violent intimidation had advanced to such an extent in the West that it was no longer possible to do so.
We're going to get into the discussions around the historical aspects of the book that you make the case for Muhammad not being a historical character. But just to dwell, I suppose, on some of these death threats that you've been receiving. I mean, I don't know how seriously one takes these or not, but there was someone on Twitter who threatened you, stating 1,200 of your books were burnt in Australia yesterday by me.
Yes.
Because you are a liar. Lucky you are miles and miles away. And talking about slashing you, cutting your head off, hanging it on the White House, and that sort of thing.
I doubt Michelle Obama would stand for that. But in any case, I can tell you that the people who threaten to kill you are not going to kill you. The only problem is that there are others who are silent who probably believe the same things that the threateners do. And so it's always a live possibility. I've had death threats for years and years. You can't let it stop you. It isn't as if I'm going to be immortal if I stop these kinds of investigations. And so you take what comes. Okay.
Well, it'd be interesting to perhaps get Adnan's take on that whole area of the way that some people who claim Muslim faith react to these sorts of publications. But one question before we begin the conversation with Adnan as well. When the first time I saw the title of the book, Robert, I immediately thought, well, is that just the equivalent of these publications about did Jesus exist, which are met generally by the scholarly community with a fair amount of scepticism because they are generally seen to be a very, far sort of to the end of the spectrum view, hyper-skeptical view of the historical fact around Jesus of Nazareth. Are you committing the same kind of, error in questioning the existence of Muhammad?
Well, obviously, I don't think so. I think that it's a perfectly legitimate question and a perfectly legitimate investigation in both cases. And as a matter of fact, the New Testament scholar Bart Ehrman, who I don't think is generally dismissed as being extreme or something of that kind, came out with a book called Did Jesus Exist? Right around the same time that my book was published. And nobody's threatening his life, incidentally. But in any case, the question of whether or not Jesus existed is, I think, a perfectly legitimate one to investigate. And people think that generally that those who think that he did not are extreme because there is so much historical evidence that he did. And all I'm saying in this book is that we need to be able to ask in a free society the same question about Muhammad. And I think that the historical evidence for his existence is actually much more tenuous and much less in abundance than it is for Jesus, and so it's much more reasonable to come to the conclusion that he did not than it is in the case of Jesus.
Well, we'll get into it, and we'll look at what Adnan Rashid, my other guest on today's programme, has to say about that. Adnan, welcome back to the programme today.
Thank you, Justin.
Tell us a little of your background. Did you grow up with a Muslim faith? What's led you to this particular form of dawah? I think it might be the right term, presenting your faith to others.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah, ma ba'd. All praises are due to Allah, the Lord of Abraham, Jesus, Moses and Muhammad. Thank you so much for inviting me once again, Justin, to this program. And I welcome Robert Spencer in this program too. Thank you, Robert, for attending the program.
Thank you.
And my initially I was not a Muslim as such. I wasn't practicing. I was born in a Muslim family. even from a scholarly background, but I didn't grow up in a very practicing family. So I studied Islam when I was 23 years old. I found Islam to be very appealing, powerfully preserved, it's pure from corruptions, and the Quran makes sense. It makes sense in the sense that I firmly believe that the Quran is the word of God. First of all, I believe God exists. And if God exists, then there are only three religions which deserve attention of believers, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And once I carried out an investigation into these religions, I ended up with Islam.
Okay. I mean, you've had a chance to read Robert's book.
Yes.
This is, I'm sure you would agree, controversial material because the Prophet Muhammad is so revered in Islam. I mean, blasphemy against him is really a terrible offence in Islam. So someone claiming he never even existed, would that constitute a blasphemy of sorts against the Prophet?
Not really, I think. First of all, there are a few points raised by Robert which I really want to address. Historical investigation didn't actually begin with Robert or people like Robert. Or even in the 19th century, we had polemicists such as William Muir, who was writing on the Prophet, and his tone was very polemical. Historical investigation started with the beginnings of Islam. For example, the Muslim scholars were the first people who carried out historical investigations into the origins of literature about the life of the Prophet, the origin of the Quran, for example, and they never received death threats. There were Christians and Jewish scholars having debates with Muslims in mosques and in universities, in Baghdad, in Cordoba, in Damascus, even in Medina. There were times when Christians came to have discussions with the Prophet.
So for you, there's a history of scholarly debate here.
Absolutely.
Which puts, but obviously there have been people who have said things to Robert of this kind. What do you say to those who do have that kind of reaction?
I think these people are naive to react in this way. They are simply unaware of history. And the Islamic view is that people like Robert should exist and they should have the right to express their views. And people should just get to see the evidence in black and white and determine for themselves whether Robert's book has any academic credentials or any scholarly basis or not.
Because on your opinion, the Quran can defend itself quite
Absolutely. The Quran can defend itself and the Muslim tradition can defend itself, as we will see in due course.
Okay, well, there you go. We've laid out some of the ground there, and I wonder if you'd like to comment or have a view on this issue. Perhaps you'd just like to sit back and listen to the arguments as they unfold. But if you do want to get in touch, as I mentioned earlier, unbelievable@premier.org.uk is the email address. Don't forget you can also phone, leave a voicemail message, and I'll try to play out as many of those as possible in next week's show as a response. 08456 52 52 52 and select the option for the Unbelievable voicemail. We're also online, of course, and you can find this show and many others and resources and all sorts of things at premier.org.uk/unbelievable. Links there to the Facebook and Twitter accounts at UnbelievableJB. If you're a tweeter, facebook.com/UnbelievableJB is the page. So look forward to hearing your responses, both by email, phone, and online at the social media networks. We're talking today about whether Muhammad existed. It's the title of Robert Spencer of Jihad Watch's new book. It's called Did Muhammad Exist? He's in conversation today with Adnan Rashid from the Hidden Institute. Hope you enjoy today's programme here on Unbelievable, the programme that aims to get you thinking.
Unbelievable with Justin Brierley.
Well, I think it's probably time to hear your historical case, or at least the bones of it, Robert, against the existence of the Prophet Muhammad. Now, are you saying outright that Muhammad never existed, or are you saying something a little bit different to that? Well, there might have been a figure, but we really only have a large amount of sort of myth and hearsay around him.
Yes, precisely. Well, the exact substance of my argument, Justin, is that the figure of Muhammad as portrayed in the Hadith and in Islamic tradition in general is almost wholly fictional. and is based on virtually nothing that can be verified as historically accurate. The bare bones of the argument are this. In the first place, we don't start hearing about biographical details of Muhammad and his life until the 8th century, and particularly in the 9th. The first biography of Muhammad was published over 125 years after his death. And the material that we can verify from being before that is very scanty. The first 60 years after the Arab conquests of the Middle East and North Africa began in the 630s, from the 630s to the 690s, while the Arabs were conquering enormous expanses of territory, and many people were noting this, writing about the conquests, writing about what had happened from both perspectives, the perspective of the conquerors and the perspective of the conquered. Neither group, neither the Arab conquerors nor the people they conquered, ever mentioned Muhammad, the Quran, or Islam. Now, this is remarkable. I'll give you one particular example. Sophronius of Jerusalem, according to legend, is supposed to have turned over the keys of the city of Jerusalem in 636 to the Caliph Umar, who generously and magnanimously is said to have refrained from entering the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and praying in it, because he knew that if he did, his followers would turn it into a mosque, and he was generously allowing it to remain a church for the Christians there. Now, the fact is that we don't hear anything about that story until the 9th century, and the earliest records we have are writings of Sophronius himself. Sophronius himself never mentions this incident, and while bemoaning the waste that the conquerors have left in their wake, he never says that they have a new religion. He never says that they have a new prophet. He never gives any indication that they have a new holy book, and Sophronius is not alone. For this first 60 years after Muhammad is supposed to have died, and his followers are going by his word and by the word of the holy book that he left to the world, are conquering these territories, there is no indication that anybody had any idea that any of these things had happened. It's only in the 690s, and particularly in the 700s, and then even more in the 800s, that we start getting this proliferation of material about Muhammad, and no indication of how it was transmitted before that. There are very elaborate chains of transmitters that are listed in Islamic tradition as being the people who carried on, who passed on this material. And yet what's remarkable about it is, at the time when they themselves lived, there is no indication that this material existed or that anyone was aware of it.
Very interesting. I mean, and we'll allow Adnan to come in on this in a moment, but just to kind of give us the other side of that coin then, where did the material that we have as a testament to the life of Muhammad come from? Are you saying it was simply made up? The question is, where does the character that we read of come from then?
Okay, in the first place, you have the name Muhammad seems to have originated as a title. It's a gerundive participle in Arabic, meaning the one who is being praised, or very simply, the praised one. And it seems to have been a title that was applied to several people, and probably also to Jesus himself, before anybody started to refer to this individual as a separate person. And that ultimately, in the 690s, the Caliph Abdul Malik and his lieutenant in Iraq, Hajjaj ibn Yusuf, they seem to have determined that at the time when empires were unified and justified by religion, and the Byzantines were Christians and the Persians were Zoroastrians, the new Arab empire seemed to feel the need, the leaders of it, that is, Abdul Malik and his entourage, began to believe that they needed a religion themselves, a uniquely Arabic religion that would unify and justify their own empire. And they began to refer to Muhammad as a separate individual and as the prophet of a new religion. Now then, Islamic tradition itself acknowledges that many of the hadiths about Muhammad, the stories of his words and deeds, were fabricated by the various factions among the Abbasids and the Umayyads in the 8th century and 9th century. In other words, warring factions vying for power among the Muslims, and they would generate these stories of Muhammad once he had been established as a separate individual and as the prophet of this new religion. They would say, we must do this because Muhammad did it, and forge stories about him to justify their own political positions. This is acknowledged in Islamic tradition itself, as we see from the fact that the Imam Bukhari, who amassed the first great hadith collection in the 9th century,
let's finish that up there, Robert.
Hadiths as inauthentic.
Robert, we'll, lots of information there, so I think it's only fair now to let Adnan start to respond to it. And there are the two issues there around whether we have information within a certain period about the life of Muhammad or the Quran or Islam, and secondly, this issue of where the story did then come from. Okay, so taking on that first issue, what's your response to Robert, Adnan?
Okay, to be fair, we need to have some rules in this program. Can I get the same amount of time Robert gets, number one? Number two, can we take things step by step? If Robert makes a point, I can respond to it, and then I can raise my contentions, and Robert can come back. Because he's throwing a lot of things, and it's sometimes difficult.
Let's give you the run-up to the end of this part of the episode.
Okay. First of all, Robert talked about evidence for Jesus Christ. Robert, you are a Christian, self-professing Christian. Is that correct?
Yes.
You are a Christian. I find it really difficult to believe that you have belief in Jesus Christ when you're trying to deny the existence of Muhammad. There is no evidence whatsoever from the life of Jesus Christ about Jesus. There is no evidence about the life, even the biography of Jesus Christ, up to the 2nd century. The first fragments of the Gospels we get are from the mid-2nd century, and one of the fragments we have is from the Gospel of John, which is a fragment equal to a credit card size. I mean, just as big as that. So I find it really difficult to believe that you believe in Jesus Christ as a historical figure who existed one time in history, and you accept all the tradition and all the Christian narrative about him. And when it comes to Islam, which is far richer in narrative, in history, in testimonies than the Christian narrative, and you choose to reject it. I'll give you an example in this regard. Some of the people you referred to as scholars, in the beginning of your book, you gave your references, your authorities. You mentioned them: Patricia Crone, Michael Cook, Joseph Schacht, Noldeck, and all these people who have studied the early history of Islam, and you refer to them as your authorities, people who inspired you. But even if you were to study their works carefully, you would have realized that they disagree with your approach. Patricia Crone, for example, states clearly, categorically, for all that we, and I quote, for all that we probably know more about Muhammad than we do about Jesus, let alone Moses or the Buddha. And we certainly have the potential to know a great deal more. There is no doubt that Muhammad existed. Occasional attempts to deny it notwithstanding, his neighbors in Byzantine Syria got to hear of him within 2 years of his death. At the least, a Greek text written during the Arab invasion of Syria between 632 and 634 mentions that a false prophet has appeared among the Saracens, and dismisses him as an impostor on the ground that prophets do not come with sword and chariot, referring to a famous document known as Doctrinae Jacobi. And Robert is aware of that. He has addressed this point in his book. But his treatment of this particular passage is obnoxious to my knowledge, in my humble opinion. Let me explain. He states that this particular passage could not be possibly referring to Muhammad, because if it was to be taken seriously, the passage is anachronistic, because it appears to be suggesting that the Prophet was alive at the time when this passage was written, but that's not the case, because the passage was written later on. So Robert raises some points in this regard. But if you read the passage carefully, the whole passage carefully, you come to realize nowhere does the passage suggest that Muhammad is alive. It refers to a man who appeared in Arabia. It doesn't state whether he's alive or dead. It says he appeared in Arabia, and he's claiming to be a prophet. And it clearly, another document which is not from much later, Michael Cook, for example, is another source Robert refers to as his authority. Let me quickly sum up
just quickly, yeah. And
okay. So Michael Cook even states, whom Robert refers to as his source, what does this material tell us? I quote, "We may begin with the major points on which it agrees with the Islamic tradition. It precludes any doubts as to whether Muhammad was a real person. He is named in a Syriac source that is likely to date from the time of the conquest." So Michael Cook is saying this. Major historians in this field are actually confirming.
These are documents which are close to the life of Muhammad.
Absolutely. Within 2 years of his death, someone mentions him by name in Syriac documents. And there's
so
nothing like this for Jesus.
Yeah,
and
so
I find it really difficult to believe as to why Robert believes in Jesus
Your
Christ.
overall point is that if you're prepared to believe Jesus on the historical data, you've got all the more reason
Well,
to believe
if he's a believing Christian, he obviously believes in Jesus Christ as a historical figure who existed in the past, and he accepts the Christian narrative about Jesus Christ. If he accepts the Christian narrative about Jesus Christ, then on what basis, on what scientific or historical basis does Robert reject the Islamic narrative? I want to know that.
Okay, well, we'll come back to you, Robert. We're just a good point just to take a quick break, and then we'll get back into this issue after a couple of minutes. Again, if you want to get involved, and I do encourage you to get in touch with the programme, unbelievable@premier.org.uk. Don't forget, we're online, premier.org.uk/unbelievable. This Saturday afternoon, we're talking, did Muhammad exist? Robert Spencer of Jihad Watch, the author of a controversial new book claiming that, well, he didn't, to all intents and purposes, in terms of the character we have portrayed in Islamic sources. So we'll be getting his response to Adnan Rashid, who's just put the other point of view on the programme just now. Do hope you can join us on the other half of a short break.
You're listening to Unbelievable on Premier Christian Radio.
It's the show that aims to get you thinking every Saturday afternoon here on Premier. Don't forget, we're online at premier.org.uk/unbelievable. Lots of resources, features, videos there, including links to the Unbelievable Conference 2012 DVD. But today on the programme, we're asking the question, did Muhammad exist? Robert Spencer of Jihad Watch says, no, not really. Quite a controversial thing to say, something that has landed Robert with a few death threats, but he says he's pretty used to that after a couple of decades of criticising Islam in one form or another. But defending the historical record of Muhammad today on the programme, Adnan Rashid of the Hidden Institute joins me here in the studio. So we heard on that last section, Robert, Adnan defending Muhammad as a historical figure, saying that actually the sources are better, earlier, than those for Jesus Christ. And so it's hypocritical of you, Robert, to claim the historical person of Jesus and to dismiss the person of Muhammad. What are your responses to those specific documents he raised?
Yes, there are actually three separate points that he made, and I'll address each one. The first one about Christianity. The question of whether Jesus existed and the question of whether Muhammad existed, these are two separate questions with two entirely different sets of evidence. And so if one says that the evidence for Jesus is worse and lesser than that of the evidence for Muhammad, that may be so, but it's simply irrelevant to the question of whether Muhammad existed.
You're now contradicting yourself. Because
we are actually discussing whether Muhammad existed and not whether Jesus did. Is it hypocritical to believe that Jesus existed and that Muhammad did not? Well, no, certainly not. I was explaining in the first segment about the 60-year gap between the time of the supposed death of Muhammad and the time we start hearing about him. In the 60 years after Jesus lived, there were the letters of St. Paul, there were Roman and Jewish historians who mentioned the Christians and Christ, and there's a great deal more evidence for Christianity. But in any case, the question of whether did Jesus exist, that's a whole separate one. The second argument that he made was about Crone and Cook and others who supposedly believed that Muhammad existed contrary to my use of their work. Actually, Crone initially did not believe that Muhammad existed, and then she switched. It's unclear why she switched, because she did not give any comprehensive refutation of her earlier work, and so it may have been because of threats or intimidation. If we're using arguments from authority, there are plenty of authorities I can adduce, such as Ibn Warraq, John Wansbrough, and others, the ex-Muslim Muhammad Sven Kalish, and many others who do not believe that Muhammad existed after having examined the same evidence that I put forth in the book. And finally, the Doctrina Jacobi which Adnan maintains refers to Muhammad, actually says that this prophet who appeared among the Saracens was proclaiming the advent of the Anointed One, the Christ who was to come. Now, Muhammad is proclaimed in Islam as being the seal of the prophets, the last prophet. That's in the Quran, chapter 33, verse 40. And so it's very hard to understand who he was actually proclaiming, what Christ he was saying was going to come. That's not a part of Muhammad's message in Islam, and so it doesn't seem to be referring to the same individual. Also, the Doctrina Jacobi says that this prophet, unnamed, says he has the keys of paradise. And also he mentioned the Thomas the Presbyter's work that says that there was the Tayyiyah of Muhammad, or MHMT. This is a bare mention, and as I said before, the story of Muhammad as set out in the Islamic tradition is wholly legendary, but this does not preclude, this is the other part of that point that I was not able to make before, but it doesn't preclude the possibility that there was some individual by this name, or that the stories of Muhammad that have come down to us are an amalgamation of stories about various prophets, or sometimes
you've responded
even some individual named Muhammad.
The
problem here is that there is no contemporary evidence of the Muhammad of Islam.
Okay, well, three responses there, and perhaps initially, we're not talking about Jesus' existence, but in any case.
But it's relevant because Robert is a Christian. He believes in Christianity. And I find it really disturbing that he accepts the narrative, the Christian narrative about Jesus Christ, and rejects the Muslim narrative about Muhammad, which is far richer, far richer than the Christian narrative.
Is that he believes there is anyway better evidence for Jesus because of the letters of Paul, early historians.
Show me one authority, show me one scholar who ever said that there is more evidence for historical Jesus than historical Muhammad. This is just Robert Spencer speaking. Robert Spencer is not a scholar.
We're discussing whether Muhammad
it is relevant because you are a Christian.
You want to have another debate about did Jesus exist? I'll be glad to do that with you.
Okay, we can leave.
About whether Muhammad existed. Can you give me any indication of the Muhammad of Islam from the first 60 years of Islam?
Good point. Okay, if you find the Jesus question to be difficult, we can drop it and we can move on to Muhammad question. But it's relevant because you're a believer. You are a believer in Christianity and you accept that narrative. But moving on to the points Robert raised about Ibn Warraq and Kalish and all these people. Ibn Warraq has been openly declared to be a polemicist. He is not a scholar. He is a pseudo-scholar, and he always borrows theories from.
Ad hominem.
This is not ad hominem because this is. I have here in front of me.
You're just attacking the man. You're not attacking his points.
Okay,
you're not attacking the evidence that he raises.
But you refer to him as a scholar, and that's not true.
Of course, he's a scholar.
Okay, in your view, he's a scholar. Fred Donner. One of the leading scholars on the early history of Islam, clearly stated in one of his articles in the New Cambridge History of Islam, published in 2010, clearly stated that people like Ibn al-Warraq are simply opportunists and
why should we believe Fred Donner? Why is Fred Donner not an opportunist and a polemicist?
Okay.
Why are you not an opportunist?
Read his works and see whether he's
How do we know? Why can't we discuss the evidence here instead of attacking individuals?
As with regards to Kalish, where is his work? What has he written? Where is his theory? We don't even know. These are empty claims. Some man said somewhere Muhammad doesn't exist. Doesn't mean anything. Just tell him to write some works, put his theory forward like you have done, and now we're talking about it.
Instead of just talking about the people.
Well, let's talk about the specific
I want to come back to some points Robert raised about a biography about Muhammad from the year, or 125 years later, for example, Ibn Ishaq. I asked Robert to bring anything like that for Jesus, number one. Again, he will say it's not relevant. Then he says the evidence is scanty. I don't agree with that. There are major scholars in fact, Robert's approach is very, very selective. People like Karen Armstrong accused him of cherry-picking from Islamic sources. Even Benazir Bhutto, she accused him of that. She was not much of a Muslim scholar.
You're attacking the man. You're not dealing with the point. You still haven't given me anything from the first 60 years
if you let me
Islam
finish, Robert,
to show that Muhammad of Islam existed.
If you let me finish, Robert, you have been known to be an Islamophobe. Some people think that you are. I'm not. I mean, this may be funny, but some people.
I'm a terrible guy. Okay,
I'm not saying that, Robert. Come on,
Muhammad existed. You still haven't given any evidence of that.
I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is, Robert, that you have praised EDL on your blog as the EDL is standing up to violent thugs from both the left and the increasingly assertive Islamic communities in Britain, and they deserve the support of all free people. Now you are openly asking the world to support an organization like EDL. How obnoxious can one get?
You want to debate EDL? Okay. Let's have a third program. But you still haven't given me any evidence that Muhammad exists.
I'm coming to that. I'm only exposing your approach, your selective approach. This is relevant, Robert. If you listen to me carefully, you will see where I'm coming from. Your approach is selective. You have cherry-picked from scholars who wrote polemical works such as William Muir.
I left out
okay, let's see the scholars. Let's read about the scholars you haven't mentioned who contradict your theory about the existence of Muhammad. For example, Carol Hillenbrand, she clearly stated that the Islamic tradition, the Islamic literature about the life of Muhammad is plausible in the light of available non-Islamic evidence we have. And this article can be found.
Give any of that evidence?
Yes, absolutely. If you ever read her works, you would have known about it. Robert, do you know there is papyri evidence from the 1st century? There is a papyri stating Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim from the year 22, exactly 10 years or 9 to 10 years after Prophet Muhammad. There is an inscription.
Let's just allow Adnan to.
Okay, if you let me finish.
Let's Adnan finish his point.
If you let me finish, you made another point that there is no evidence of this Islamic tradition or Hadith literature from the lives of the people who are known to have written these works. You made this claim very clearly, and it's recorded. Imam Malik, I don't know if you know about him. Do you know the difference between Anas bin Malik?
Read my book. Okay. Imam Malik is in the book.
Okay, I know he's in the book. I'm coming with a point now.
If you know he's in the book, why are you claiming on the air that I don't know about him? If you know he's in my book.
If you let me finish, you will know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, if I let you finish.
Okay, Robert, can you please tell me what is the difference between Anas bin Malik and Malik bin Anas?
That's completely irrelevant.
No, Robert, you have studied Islam for 20 years. You claim that.
60 years.
Robert.
Anas bin Malik and Malik ibn.
It's a question.
You're talking about 8th century individuals. I'm asking you about 7th century.
Okay, Robert, it's a basic question. Any primary student of Islam knows the answer to this question. Can you tell me the difference between Anas bin Malik and Malik bin Anas? You have studied Islam for 20 years, Robert. Go ahead, without Googling it.
Listen, I'm not playing the game.
Robert, you obviously don't have the answer from the top of your head. I will now tell you. Anas bin Malik.
Okay, I'm thoroughly confused. So tell me what this is all about.
Anas bin Malik
was. Side issue.
I'm showing the people listening to us generally that Robert Spencer does not have any independent knowledge of Islam of his own. He has cherry-picked from sources. He has plagiarized the works of some 19th century polemicists and mid-20th century polemicists.
Now,
yes, absolutely. And you have
Don't
put your own spins on them. Now, this is clear that, Robert, you don't have any independent knowledge of Islam. If you don't know who Malik bin Anas and Anas bin Malik is, then you don't know. Let me explain. Let me explain.
Okay,
I have a point to make very quickly.
I'd like you to make
Malik bin Anas was a hadith scholar who compiled one of the first hadith books, not the only one of the first ones. His book is called Mu'atta Imam Malik. There is a manuscript from the time when Malik bin Anas was alive of Mu'atta Imam Malik. Malik bin Anas was a historical figure, and there is a manuscript on papyri available from that very time when Malik bin Anas was alive, and you can see the manuscript on a website called Islamic. Well, you made a claim, Robert. I'm refuting your claim. You made a claim that there is nothing from the lives of these people who are claimed to have written these works.
70s.
I know this, Robert. I know when he died. He died in the year 176 of Islam, which you probably didn't know. Okay. My point is that there is a manuscript of his hadith literature from his life on papyri. And this is to refute your point that there is nothing available from the lives of these people. You made a bold claim without any knowledge of the subject.
You're misrepresenting my claim.
Okay, well...
Finish your point up, Adnan, and then I'll let Robert...
Okay, did you know about this papyri, Robert?
It's in the book.
Where?
If you had read my book, you would have seen my discussion of it. You're lying up and down.
Okay.
You ought to be ashamed of yourself.
Okay, Mu'atta Imam Malik. You said Mu'atta Imam Malik's papyri is discussed.
Yeah, it's in the book. It's discussed in the book at length.
Okay, then then...
How dare you?
Okay, wait, Robert.
Have some honesty.
Okay.
Have some integrity.
This is why I'm exposing I've read the book, Robert.
Yeah,
I've
you're
read the book.
exposing by claiming that I do not discuss in my book.
I'm exposing your approach. You have
You're
discussed...
a dishonest man.
No, Robert. You have discussed evidence in your book, and you simply deny it when you debate Muslims.
You're claiming I am ignorant of things that I discuss at length in my book. You want to be ashamed of yourself.
I've already shown that. You don't know who Malik bin Anas is and Anas bin Malik is. You don't know the difference between them.
I refuse to answer your question.
No, you don't understand the difference. You don't know what you have written in your book. I don't even think you have written your own book, Robert.
Okay, look. I'm going to just try and move us on a bit here.
Okay,
because,
this is ridiculous. This is a lying man.
I know the discussion in his book. I was only exposing his approach.
This man is making it about me.
Okay.
He's making it about ad hominem attacks. He obviously has no substance to his argument. He's a total liar. In the reality, Muwatta Malik is a product of the 8th century. It is the first Hadith collection to have been written. It exists in multiple editions, and none of it establishes that Muhammad existed at all, because it's already 125 years after his death.
Look, gents, let's just cool it down. Okay. Sure. I mean, I'm all for feisty engagement, but I think we must try and crack on with. I didn't realize that you'd gotten such a ridiculous interlocutor for this.
Let's
try and keep it reasonably civil, gentlemen. And
we are quite civil. I mean, this is.
Oh yeah, we're civil. What are you going to make up next, buddy?
Okay, all right. Let's.
Robert, let me make up things, and you can respond to them. You're a free man. You have more airtime than I have. I mean, you've been around NBC and Fox News. Go and expose me. Take the theories and go and expose me. I'm trying to expose you here today, and I have done a good job.
I claim I don't even know about, and I just explained to you that it exists in.
Robert, you discuss evidence in your book, and you simply deny it in your public speeches.
It's discussed at length in my book.
All right.
I know that, Robert.
I'm going to close this.
I'm
going to close this down, guys, and say if you if you're listening and you want to. You have a reaction to this, which is already proving to be a feisty discussion, to say the least, here in the studio. Do email in unbelievable@premier.org.uk. We will continue in just a moment's time. We're talking this afternoon. Did Muhammad exist? Robert Spencer is on the line of Jihad Watch, author of the new book of the same title. Adnan Rashid of the Hidden Institute here, and Adnan says, of course he did. There are plenty of early sources which support the historical figure of Muhammad. On the contrary, Robert says, no, there simply aren't. And what I want us to do, gentlemen, is get to some of the specific cases that you've been talking about. So let's drop the talking about authorities and things like that for the moment, and whether we're good scholars or not on either side. And let's talk about some of these specific issues. Unbelievable this afternoon here on Premier Christian Radio. Find us also online at premier.org.uk/unbelievable.
Unbelievable with Justin Brierley.
Okay, if I can move on to an area that Robert brought up, and Robert, just again, if you could quickly summarise this. But what you're saying is that in all the areas that that were conquered by what was traditionally ascribed to is the Islamic sort of spreading out, you say none of the literature of that time that describes these encounters ever mentions the Quran, Muhammad, Islam, and that is entirely, makes the case for the idea that these people who were doing this conquering had no such religion, had no such prophet.
Yes, quite so. And when Muhammad does appear, the name, it's clearly a title. For example, some of the coins that the early Arab empires issued in Palestine and in the surrounding areas in the 630s, 640s, 650s, some of them have the inscription Muhammad, but it's clearly not the Muhammad of Islam, because on the obverse you have an image of a ruler, and in the first place images are forbidden in Islam, and the ruler's carrying a cross. And Muhammad is supposed to have said that at the end of the world, Jesus will come back and break all the crosses. So if the people who were issuing these coins knew that he had said this and revered him as being the prophet of Allah, it's inconceivable that they would have pictured rulers with a cross on their coinage. And so it indicates very clearly that the Arab authorities at the time when Islam is supposed to have been first spreading around the world, didn't know anything about what Muhammad taught, and this is because it simply had not been invented yet. The rulers of the Arab Empire itself were the ones who would have known most of all that Muhammad had said that if he had actually said it, and if it had been known that Islam abhors the cross and says that Jesus did not die on the cross in the Quran. And so there's so many indications that there is no Quran or Islam or Muhammad at this time. Even at the beginning of the 8th century, there is a non-Muslim polemicist who is writing about the holy books of the Muslims, and he says they have this Quran and they have Surah al-Baqarah. Now, Surah al-Baqarah is the second chapter of the Quran, the chapter of the cow. And so it seems clear that even at the beginning of the 8th century, some 60 years after the Quran is supposed to have been collected together and distributed around the Muslim world by the Caliph Uthman, it was not collected together because people are seeing it, what is now its second chapter, as a separate book.
Okay, I'm gonna just give a chance for Adnan to have a full response to that. So the issue here then is, where is the mentions of Islam? Where is the mentions of Muhammad? Where is the mentions of the Quran from these invading forces? If this was an Islamic force that was
the mention of Islam is detailed in the Islamic narrative, and all the non-Islamic narrative, all the non-Islamic material, whether archaeological, numismatic, or literary, supports the Islamic tradition.
And this is from within that period, that sort of 120-year
absolutely,
period.
Absolutely. The scholars have studied this. I'm naming them. Michael Bonner, for example, Fred M. Donner, and Carol Hillenbrand, Robert Hoyland. Robert, this is why I exposed his approach. He actually mentions things in his book, and when it comes to debating Muslims, he categorically denies the existence of that evidence. So he talks about the papyri of Malik, and then he comes up and he says that there is nothing from the lives of those people who wrote the hadith. So this is why Robert again needs to go back to his book and see the people he quotes and how he rejects or how he simply ignores what they have said otherwise. For example, Robert Hoyland, he quotes him in his book, and the very article he quotes from clearly states that the coins which the early Muslims were minting with crosses on them were there because the Christian population of Syria at the time wouldn't accept any other coinage. For example, Muawiyah, who came before Abdul Malik bin Marwan. Muawiyah, who was before Abdul Malik bin Marwan, he attempted to reform the coinage, but he stopped because the Christian population wasn't in favor of that. And Robert Hoyland clearly mentions that, which I'm sorry to say.
And so the Muhammad mentioned is the Muhammad of...
Absolutely. All the scholars are unanimous on that point. I'm talking about scholars, major scholars writing for Cambridge and Oxford. Go and pick up this history written, published by Cambridge University Press, and read the scholars what they have to say about historical Muhammad. This is a very hostile, extreme view that Muhammad didn't exist, and this is the first time in my life I'm hearing these theories.
Let's allow Robert to respond now.
Okay, let me quickly...
Yeah, once again, we get
I haven't finished
argument from authority.
Okay, we'll come back with the second part of your response.
I thought I was going to get a chance to respond.
Go ahead, Robert.
Yes, once again we get an empty argument from authority. Robert Hoyland is an excellent scholar, and I do quote him extensively in the book, but in reality Robert Hoyland translates a great deal of the early material about the Arab conquests, and he translates it wrongly, where the conquered people are writing about the conquerors. They call them Saracens, Ishmaelites, Hagarians, and other words of this kind, but they never call them Muslims. And they never call them Muslims because obviously there was no Islam. And this is a very important point, but Hoyland completely obscures it in his work by translating these words, Saracens, Hagarenes, Ishmaelites, and so on, as Muslims. And so he gives the impression that Islam was known among the conquered people in the 7th century much earlier than it actually was.
What about this issue of the
seriously misleading?
The crosses
also,
on the coin.
Mr. Rashid continues to lie and to claim that I'm contradicting what is in my book when actually he's completely misrepresenting what is in my book. Muwatta Malik is a hadith collection from the 8th century. It is 125 years or more after after Muhammad's death. And so in the book, I discuss how it is the earliest collection of hadiths, but it is late, and it is also existing in multiple editions, which attest to a great deal of embroidery and editing as to what Muhammad actually said and did. And the idea that this is some kind of early attestation to Muhammad's existence is completely misleading. What I'm contending here, and what I contend in my book, is that in the first 60 years after Muhammad is supposed to have died, there's absolutely no indication that anyone, the people who were known as the Muslims now, or the people that they conquered, had any idea of any Muhammad or Quran or Islam. Muwatta Malik is completely irrelevant to that because he was not, the book was not written 60 years after Muhammad died. And so the problem is that he's taking a very late source and pretending that it is early.
Let's allow Adnan to respond.
Of no more value than his arguments from authority with scholars who plainly manipulate the evidence, like Robert Hoyle.
Let's give Adnan
There is a papyri manuscript from the life of Malik, so Malik was definitely a historical figure. And I have a chain of hadiths here in front of me, which you can see. It's in Arabic. I know I don't expect you to
not
read
much
this.
use for me, I'm afraid.
But
Adnan,
I can tell you, this chain is my chain, which was given to me by my teacher, the person I took hadith from, and he permitted me to teach hadith. And this goes straight back to Malik, uninterrupted chain, going straight back to Malik, and each teacher was taking this authority from his teacher, and this chain is unbroken. All these individuals mentioned in this chain are real people. I can go through the chain, it's long, but Malik took hadith from Nafi', his teacher, and Nafi' took hadith from Abdullah bin Umar, who was Nafi's teacher, and Abdullah bin Umar took hadith tradition from the Prophet. Now, what do the modern scholars have to say about this? Again, Robert does not acknowledge the conclusions of modern scholarship. Motzki is a leading scholar on the science of hadith, and his conclusion goes against the conclusions of Joseph Schacht, who was writing in the 50s, whom again Robert quotes extensively and relies upon his conclusions, forgetting about what the modern scholars of today have to say, those who have studied. And I'm pretty sure if Robert has read the refutation of Schacht's views written by Muhammad Mustafa al-Adami in his book on Schacht's Origin of Muhammadan Jurisprudence, he wouldn't have written, if he was an honest person. Let me quickly quote Motzki, and I'll stop there.
Okay.
Motzki,
very quickly.
Motzki states in one of his studies carried out on a hadith collection known as Musannaf Abdul Razak, he states, while studying the Musannaf of Abdul Razak, I came to the conclusion that the theory championed by Goldziher, Schacht, and in their footsteps many others, myself included, which in general reject hadith literature as a historical reliable source for the first century, deprives the historical study of early Islam of an important and useful type of source. Now, Motzki is effectively saying that hadith literature is an effective and is an authentic source of knowledge, which goes back to the first century when the Prophet was alive. So Motzki has traced this tradition back to the first century. So the scholars are saying
you're saying that the hadith chain of passing on is trustworthy, and
I'm not saying this again. I'm not arguing from authority here. I have evidence to. I have evidence to prove that if you give me time. But I'm telling you what the scholars are saying. Robert is.
Let's hear from Robert one more time before we have to go to a quick break again. And you've got literally 2 minutes here, Robert, just to respond.
Once more, he's plainly this man is an astonishingly bold liar. He said if Robert had read the works of Muhammad Mustafa Azami, he would not have written what he's written. Well, I have my book right here, and I have Muhammad Mustafa Azami, his theories and Motzki's theories discussed at length, starting on page 82 of my book. And so Adnan Rashid is just a liar. Now, in reality, the chains of transmitters, is there anything to them? The Muslim scholars themselves acknowledge that hundreds of thousands, literally hundreds of thousands of hadiths were forged in the name of Muhammad in order to justify various political positions among the warring factions of the early Muslims. Now, you're telling me that these hundreds of thousands of stories proliferated about Muhammad, but the chains of transmitters were never forged and could not have been. That's a patently ridiculous view. Obviously, if stories about Muhammad could be forged, so also could the chains of transmission, in order to give them the air of authenticity and to try to help them gain acceptance among the community.
All right. Thank you very much for being brief on that last point there, Rob, because we do have to go to a break. We're discussing the controversial topic, did Muhammad exist? My guests on the programme today, what's been a really feisty interaction thus far, is Robert Spencer, author of the book of the same name, and Adnan Rashid of the Hitten Institute. So we'll be back in a short moment's time here on the programme that aims to get you thinking on a Saturday afternoon. Unbelievable. Welcome back to Unbelievable, the third and final part of the programme this Saturday afternoon with me, Justin Brierley. And don't forget, you can find this online at premier.org.uk/unbelievable. Many other shows on Islam and other religions, atheism, and more besides there, as well as details of today's guests and of our DVD, Unbelievable, the Conference 2012, which you may want to get hold of. Coming up next week on the show, in a sort of partner programme to this, did Jesus exist, is the question we'll be asking. But a little bit different to the forthright debate we've had today. It's going to be more a one-on-one discussion between myself and Bart Ehrman. Now, he's known really as a critic of Christianity for books like Misquoting Jesus and Forged. But his most recent publication, Did Jesus Exist?, is actually a defence of the historical Jesus. Well, that's actually got him into hot water with a number of atheists who have decried this book for various reasons. Well, we're going to be putting some of those criticisms to Bart on the programme next week, and a number of the questions you sent in via Twitter and Facebook and email. So that'll be next week at the same time. Bart Ehrman on Did Jesus Exist? For the moment, it's back to the topic of today's show.
You're listening to Unbelievable on Premier Christian Radio.
Well, concluding today's programme, Did Muhammad Exist? Has been the title of our discussion, and Adnan Rashid and Robert Spencer have been going at it with some ferocity, I have to say, compared to the usual format of the programme. But these issues do raise a lot of big questions, and both sides obviously very stand by their points of view quite voraciously. Now, let's come to you first of all, Adnan, because again, we heard from Robert at the end of that last section, suggesting that, well, just as people can forge stories about Muhammad, they can forge chains of, passing down these things with the hadith, etc.
The reason why I keep saying that Robert hasn't actually read these sources is because I firmly believe that Robert hasn't written his book. I firmly believe that. Because Robert
What do you mean by that?
I mean by that, Robert claims to have studied Islam for 20 years. He claims that boldly. And if he cannot answer the question who Anas bin Malik is and Malik bin Anas is, then he hasn't studied Islam for 20 years. I know that for a fact. And if that's the case, then he hasn't even written his own book. Because if he has studied Azami's books, which he claims in his book, then he would have definitely quoted his conclusions as well. I mean, he would have accepted his conclusions. For example, Azami's conclusions were accepted by a wide range of scholars in the West, and they simply abandoned Shah's theory in this regard. Azami clearly stated, and I quote, careful scrutiny of his examples, talking about Shah, his examples and repeated reference to the original source material, however, reveals inconsistencies both within the theory itself and in the use of source material, unwarranted assumptions, and unscientific method of research, mistakes of fact, ignorance of the political and geographical realities of the time, and misrepresentation of the meaning of the text quoted, and misunderstanding of the method of quotation of early scholars. If you have read this, which you do claim to have read, then why would you hide this? Why would you not even accept this conclusion? Because it's black and white, it's clear. That's why modern scholars on hadith accept the conclusions of Azami. He has exposed Shah and his theory, and no one any longer holds on to this theory. Coming back to the issue of coins, Robert has picked up one coin, a copper coin with a cross on it, and he's making a big deal out of it. There are coins here, again, New Cambridge History of Islam. There's an article on numismatics, Islamic numismatics in this, and you can go and see the pictures of these coins. Some of the coins, they simply have a pole. The cross has been removed, and one of the biggest reasons why Abdul Malik bin Marwan was changing or tampering with the coins was to assert his Islamic authority, which is very clearly
the question, I suppose, is how early are these coins? When was he doing that? Is it within the period that we're talking about, which is the disputed period of whether...
The formula, Muhammad Rasulullah, Muhammad the Messenger of Allah, appeared before Abdul Malik bin Marwan minted his coins. It appeared in the time of Abdullah bin Zubair, one of his governors, Abdul Malik bin Abdullah, who was the first person in a city called Bishapur to put this formula down on the coin, and Abdul Malik followed soon after. Now the point here is that Abdul Malik was taunted by the Byzantine emperor, and this is clearly stated in Islamic sources, which Robert refuses to accept. It's clearly stated that the Byzantine emperor threatened Abdul Malik by putting derogatory terms about the Prophet of Islam if he doesn't stop tampering with Byzantine coins, because you would simply see the Byzantine emperor with his pomp and glitter on the coin with a formula, Islamic formula. And this was to taunt the Christians, or for example, this was to show the Christians that now we are in power, the Muslims, and we mint the coins as we like. Then he was advised by his advisors to reform the coinage and mint your own coins. Here I have a coin in my hand from the year 86, Abdul Malik bin Marwan's coin, which you can see. I'm a numismatician, and I know the history of coins, how they were minted and how they came about. This theory about having a cross on the coin is simply obnoxious because it goes against the bulk of evidence we have from the...
Okay, I'm going to have to ask you to start to draw it to a close now, and I'll let Robert have his final summation.
We have clearly seen that Robert Spencer is cherry-picking from Islamic sources to make his points, and his points are quite obnoxious. Any scholar who was to study his book would see, and he has been declared to be a polemicist. He is known to be a hater of Islam. In fact, some of the worst people on the face of the earth have quoted him as their authority. One of them is Breivik, who killed almost 100 people. Let me finish. Almost 100 people. He states in his manifesto that Robert is the man to read on Islam, and he should be given the Nobel Peace Prize.
There may be...
It's like Hitler telling you that people Hitler was inspired by should be given Nobel Peace Prize.
Let's allow. We understand where you're coming from there.
Right.
Adnan and Rashid shouldn't go there because Hitler was inspired by the Mufti of Jerusalem and Islam. But in any case,
let's not start
the
another
reality
discussion.
of the fact is that his deep dishonesty is manifest in the fact that Adnan Rashid keeps lying about what's in my book, claiming that I don't know about what is discussed in there, and claiming that I have not dealt with evidence that I deal with at great length in the book. So it's a shame, it's dispiriting that the best defense that can come from a defender of the existence of Muhammad is somebody who engages in gutter ad hominem attacks and in plain lies and misrepresentations of the clear evidence. In reality, he went on at length in his summation about the coinage, and here again he's lying because he's talking about Abdul Malik and his coins, but the coins that I have in the book, and he claims that I only had one coin pictured. Actually, there are 3 coins pictured and others discussed. And here again, this man is just completely dishonest. In reality, the coins that I picture are from before the time of Abdul Malik. And so the idea that these coins were minted with crosses on them, but the inscription of Muhammad, in order to taunt the Christians, as if there were really be coinage issued by a great empire as a taunt, it's kind of ridiculous in itself. But in any case, they're from before this period. They're from the period of the 630s, 640s, and 650s, and into the 660s. Also Muawiyah, who he claims was a Muslim ruler and an enemy of the Christians, he also, in an official inscription on a public building in Gaza, he put a cross right next to his name. And so the idea that he was an Islamic ruler is completely inconsistent with the evidence. He was the ruler of a nascent Arab empire that had many Christians in it. And Adnan Rashid is inconsistent in saying in the first place that they put these crosses on these public material, the coins and the inscriptions, in order to appeal to the Christians and yet also to taunt them. In reality, they put these crosses on the buildings because of the large Christian population, and they did not consider that what they had was inconsistent with Christianity. They were the adherents of a creedally vague monotheism that predates Islam. If you go to the original sources, there aren't any that say that Muhammad and the Quran and Islam existed within this period. Abdul Malik ibn Marwan is exactly the time when you start to see Muhammad is the messenger of Allah and so on the coins and in the public inscriptions. And Adnan Rashid actually admitted that this was the first appearance of it, aside from Az-Zubair, who predates Abdul Malik by 6 years. And so you don't get until the end part of the 7th century any mention of this man who is supposed to have inspired conquests that went on for decades before that. And so the historical evidence is completely lacking, and all that Adnan Rashid can do in response is do scurrilous and gutter ad hominem attacks against me and against the people who are the scholars who have said these things, and to claim that scholars have said what they have not said, to claim that I have not discussed what I have discussed, and so on. And so it's dispiriting to see that this ridiculous presentation is the best that can be brought forward.
We are going to have to draw it to a close.
But in reality, the existence of Muhammad is based on no historical evidence whatsoever.
Okay. As much as I'd love to be able to allow more back and forth, we'll have to leave it there. And, of course, I'll post links to both Robert's book and website and, indeed, Adnan's website, where you can find more resources from him and the groups that he's involved with as well. Now, I'm not going to pretend that this has been a cordial exchange, gentlemen, but it's certainly, at least once we were able to start to discuss some of the specifics of these cases, it's certainly given a lot of food for thought. So thank you, gentlemen, both, for being with me.
Thank you so much, Justin, for inviting me and Robert. Thank you so much, Robert, for attending this interesting debate. Although you seem to be very angry, but I do apologize if I did offend you in any way. That wasn't my intention. I was simply trying to...
You're just a liar.
All right.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Thank you.
We'll leave it.
I know you're upset.
Shame on you.
I know you are upset.
Okay. I am going to leave it there. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Well, what did you think about today's discussion? Both the way it was conducted and the evidence brought to bear. I'd be interested in hearing your response. Be giving out the ways to get in touch again in just a short moment's time. In the meantime, that's it for today's discussion, and we'll be looking at some of your feedback to the last few weeks of programming in just a moment's time.